Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. He was the richest man of his time, the most generous American philanthropist to this day, a ruthless union-busting robber baron, and an ardent advocate for international peace. He's Andrew Carnegie, and he has met his definitive biographer in David Nasaw, in the simply titled and covered Andrew Carnegie. David is a distinguished professor of history at the CUNY Graduate Center and the author of the best-selling and prize-winning biography, The Chief, The Life of William Randolph Hearst. Welcome, David.
Delighted to be here.
Rare critical unanimity in proclaiming this book definitive. Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you.
Why Carnegie, and why Carnegie after Hearst?
It was, I'm embarrassed to say it, but it wasn't even my idea. It was after Hearst,
which was Bancroft Prize winner, Lucas Prize winner.
It did well, and I remember I got a call from my agent, and then I got another call and another call and another call saying, what are you going to do next? And it suddenly occurred to me, because up until then I would speak to my agent every 9 years, that something was up. So I said, is my shelf life expiring? And she said, well, I wouldn't put it that way. So she set up a meeting with a wonderful editor who at the time was at Random House, Ann Godoff. And Ann, I came in with lots of ideas, and Ann said, well, how about, priceless. Oh, she's wonderful. Yeah. And she said, how about Andrew Carnegie? She said, we've done this, we did a great biography of Rockefeller, we did a great biography of Morgan. Nobody's done Carnegie
one of the icons,
recently.
Right.
Yeah, why don't you do it? So I said, let me think about it. I went to Washington, where his official papers are.
Right.
And I looked at some of his letters, and then I read the earlier biographies. And I discovered one in his letters that he had a sense of humor. I can't stand the idea of spending 6 years of my life on somebody who doesn't have a sense of humor.
Right, good, this is applause.
Yeah, so then I read the early biographies, and they're good, but they leave a lot out. They're business biographies, they don't get the man, they don't get the sense of humor, they don't get the times.
So you did some preliminary research, and then you go to the biographers and find out there's a lack.
Yeah, there's something missing, there's something that I can say. The next step is, so I said, yeah, I'll do it. With the faith that I was going to find stuff. Right. That nobody else.
Right, but you had no knowledge. I mean, you presumed that this existed.
I was pretty sure I could see that there were lacks.
Okay.
I could see in the, historian reads the footnotes first and the bibliography first. Okay. So I read the footnotes very carefully in all the biographies.
Sure.
And I saw that, there had to be stuff out there. And I began looking, and I found incredible stuff.
Prenuptial agreements, letters to presidents. I mean, the prenuptial agreement really says something about Carnegie. It's prodigiously researched. How long did it take you to do it from the moment you talked to the editor to the completion, when it was really, really done?
6 years.
Wow.
6 years.
How do you live with a guy that long? How did you live with Hearst that long?
It has to be, with both of these guys, and I've been incredibly lucky. I had a tall Californian with a tiny little squeaky voice, and I had a tiny little Scotsman,
right?
Who settled in Allegheny City with a big voice. What they had in common was that they were both absolutely fascinating guys. Mm-hmm. I loved them at times. I hated them at times.
Both of them.
Both of them. But they never, ever, ever bored me. And I could never predict what they were going to do. What more could anybody ask for?
So this is an adventure for you. Describe sort of the joy of the biography. I mean, you didn't start as a biographer. As I told you, one of the first books that I read of yours was The Children of the City, and then you talked about a book on amusements, going out. How did you move into biography, and what are the satisfactions of the biography?
I wanted to do a biography of Hearst because I wanted to get at, in all my historical work, I've tried to figure out the connection between culture and politics, communications and politics, the communications industry and politics. And Hearst seemed to me the ideal case study, because here's a man who owns the largest media empire in the world at the time, radio stations, magazines, newspapers, syndicates, the whole shebang. And he wants to run for president. And not only does he want to run for president, but when he realizes he's not going to make it, he wants to control the country's foreign policy, its tax policy, everything else. So it was ideal for me. So I got a contract, I wrote the Hearst biography, and it opened up all sorts of things. At first I was writing sort of an anti-biography. I didn't want to show how great men make history. I wanted to show...
Yeah, which is one of the attractions for a mass audience of biography.
Yeah, I didn't want to do that, because I don't believe that any individual makes history by himself.
And Carnegie certainly didn't.
Carnegie certainly didn't. Carnegie was what I wanted to do was to understand a time, understand a historical period through a guy. And these two were lenses into the Industrial Revolution in industrial America, and modern, with Hearst, 20th century America and the age of corporate media.
Wow. Carnegie, reformer, activist, peace activist. In my lead, I talked about sort of his contradictions. You know, the richest man, the most generous man. But you point out in a great chapter called The Gospel of Wealth, which was based on a series of essays by Carnegie, sort of the contradictions of the man, his philanthropy and his ruthlessness as a capitalist. Talk about that.
Well, one of the things I discovered, all the previous biographers and everybody who's talked about Carnegie has sort of assumed that once he decided to give away his money, he became a warm, cuddly, nice guy. You know, philanthropists are nice guys. They give back their money. Well, it ain't necessarily so. What I found was that his decision to give away his money, which he made very early.
Right. In his 30s.
Yeah. He knew from his 30s that he was going to give back everything. That made him infinitely more ruthless because it legitimized the exploitation of his workforce. The more he squeezed out of labor, the greater the profit. The greater the profit, the more he'd have to give back to the community. So,
and better he gave it back than they kept it in the first place?
You know, he calls himself a Democrat with a small d. And he says he believes in American representative institutions. And he's against the aristocracy, and he wants the monarchy in England to be eliminated.
Right.
But he's not very much of a Democrat in real life because he believes that he knows best. He is an adherent and a disciple of Herbert Spencer and social Darwinism.
Talk about that. Talk about Spencer, social Darwinism, and how this affects Carnegie's life and worldview.
Carnegie believes that societies, histories, organisms, the universe are governed by the laws of evolutionary progress, that things are getting better and better and better. The way they're getting better and better and better is through a mechanism called the survival of the fittest. The fittest survive, they rise to the top, they make history. They become the agents of historical change. In the 1500s and the 1600s, those agents of progress were the captains of the military because they provided protection for the cities, for the farmers, so that they could grow crops, so that the population could increase, so that civilizations could be born. By the 19th century, the men who were making history were the captains of industry. And Carnegie believed that money came into his pocket not because he worked harder than anybody else, he didn't, not because he was smarter than anybody else, he wasn't, but because it was in accordance with the laws of evolutionary progress. He understood the times he lived in. He used that knowledge and his administrative talents to make lots and lots of money. And why did the money come into his pockets? Because he was the best person to give it back to the larger community.
You call him the moral philosopher of industrial capitalism. Explain that.
He believed, and I believe, I think we agree on this, if nothing else, that individuals don't make millions of dollars on their own. I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to accept the fact that a Carnegie or a Gates or a Buffett on their own make the millions or the billions of dollars that end up in their stock portfolios. Carnegie said very directly, the individual does not produce wealth, it is the community that produces wealth. When the economy expands, as it did in the late 19th century, when the population grows, when there's need for railroads and railroads need steel, the man who's at the center of the railroad network in Pittsburgh and who can produce steel is going to become a millionaire. Now, who makes that money? It's the community. And therefore, it is to the community that that wealth has to return.
And he said that a rich man who dies with his wealth should die in disgrace.
Yeah. He says it is the responsibility, the moral responsibility of the man who has amassed millions and millions of dollars because of certain administrative talents or managerial talents or accounting talents. It is the responsibility of that individual to give back the money, and to give back the money during his lifetime so he can use the same talents that he used in amassing the money to give it back.
That's crucial. During his lifetime, he gives away, $320 million, and those dollars, which is now would be tens of billions of dollars. In fact, to bring it to contemporary terms, I mean, Warren Buffett, when he gave the $31 billion worth of stock to the Gates Foundation, cites Carnegie as the paradigm of doing this. So, I mean, the influence is there.
Right. It took about 120 years. When Carnegie originally said in the 1880s that the man who dies rich dies disgraced, and when he said to all his fellow millionaires, you have a responsibility to give it back, give it all back, they thought he was crazy. They thought he was a lunatic. Only within the last 10 years have men like Gates and Buffett, and our mayor, Bloomberg, is going to be the next.
Right.
They are going to give back all or a large part of their fortune.
Why?
I think
for the same reasons that Carnegie did?
I think they believe that there is a moral imperative. I think they know, certainly Buffett knows, and he said it, I didn't make this money. I was a lucky man. I knew how to pick stocks.
Right.
And if I had lived anywhere else, in any other part of the world.
At any other time.
At any other time.
Carnegie says the same thing.
Carnegie says the same thing.
Okay. Now, at the same time, he is this entrepreneur capitalist. You point out that he sort of works against our stereotypic images. He doesn't work full days. He takes year-long vacations. He leaves Pittsburgh, leaves the management up to somebody else, is in New York, is in Scotland. He's sort of this absentee capitalist. So at the same time, he's this robber baron who's very ruthless. And we'll talk about, let's go to Homestead. What happens? Lay out the history and lay out the various interpretations and tell us what you found here.
I found, because I had access to the total correspondence between Frick and Carnegie.
Right, and Frick explained.
Frick is, Henry Clay Frick is Carnegie's lieutenant. He's the manager. A ruthless manager. He's the manager of Carnegie Steel. He wants to make a profit, and he wants to do anything he has to make a profit, including destroying unions, breaking strikes. Carnegie in 1892 knows that there's a new contract up for Homestead,
which is the
largest steel
mill.
He plans with Frick how they're going to break the union.
They're going
to break the union, the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers.
Very tough union.
They're going to break the union. It's a union that controls the mayor's office and all of the local offices in Homestead, which is a little borough off Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh. The Union controls everything, okay? Carnegie and Frick know it's going to be really hard to get scab workers in there.
Right.
The only way to do that is for Carnegie and Frick to take over the town. And in order to take over the town, they need their own army. Where do they get their army? From the Pinkertons.
Right.
They hire an army of thugs. They bring in that army of thugs to take over the town so that they can then move in scabs. In the Battle of Homestead, several dozen Homestead workers, children, innocent people, citizens of Homestead are injured. Several are killed. It is one of the bloodiest labor conflicts in this country. It's on the front page of every American newspaper, of every European newspaper for weeks on end. Carnegie happens to be in Scotland at the time. He's planned the whole thing.
Right.
Carnegie says, I didn't do it.
And previous work on Carnegie seems to have bought his.
Right.
How did you find out that he lied? Well, you went to correspondence.
I found out two things. First, none of the other biographers have ever gone to Pittsburgh and read through the microfilm of the newspapers. If you read through newspapers, you discover that 3 years earlier, Carnegie had done the exact same thing at his other steel mill. He had brought in Pinkertons to break a strike. So I know, and everyone in Pittsburgh knows, this is his modus operandi.
Right.
This is what he does to break strikes. Number two, I had the Carnegie-Frick correspondence. And in it, I see the two of them making their plans, and I see a letter from Frick saying, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do ... I also know that Carnegie has a cable office, transatlantic cable office, about 20 miles from his estate where he's hiding out in Scotland. All he has to do is send a message via carriage, 20 miles. That message goes transcontinental in seconds to New York, and from New York, it's sent to Pittsburgh by telegram. So he's
playing the Pontius Pilate, but not.
Exactly. He's an hour away from Frick. He's in continual communication with Frick. At any time, he can say to Frick, I don't want the Pinkertons, and he doesn't say it.
Okay. And one of the another interesting facet of Carnegie, I mean, sort of focusing on the negative, if you will, is that he bought Pittsburgh because he bought the political machine. He understood the importance of bribery, and much of his fortune is based on what we would now call illegal activities, insider trading, but it wasn't illegal or necessarily immoral at the time.
No,
and he admitted it.
No, he knew what he was doing. He made his fortune, and this is one of the parts of the book I loved writing because I didn't understand it. He worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad. He was an assistant to a vice president. The vice president and the president realized at one point, I'll give you one example, they realized at one point that wooden bridges were burning. And the wooden bridges weren't heavy enough to carry the bigger locomotives and the bigger trains that emerged after the Civil War. So they had to build hundreds, literally hundreds of iron bridges all over Pennsylvania. What did they do? They set up a secret company to build iron bridges. The chief stockholders in that company were the president and vice president of the Pennsylvania Railroad.
This is thoughtful.
They then funneled secretly all the contracts to this company to build the bridges for the railroad. They made a fortune as the stockholders of the companies that built. And I'm not finished yet. The bridge company needs iron. Where's it going to get its iron? They set up a second company, an iron mill, to supply their bridge company. They own the iron mill.
So this is vertical integration. We love it. Come on.
Yeah. They needed a young man to serve as their front because they didn't want anyone to know that they held stock in these companies. Carnegie held the stock in his name, ran the companies, and made his first, $1 million that way.
Let's go back to the biographer's, work. Let's talk about joys, frustrations, and surprises. What was the joy of the 6 years?
The joy of the 6 years is putting together pieces of a puzzle that other people hadn't been able to do. The joy is finding, I'll give you an example.
God, please.
I discovered his prenuptial agreement.
I love it. Go ahead.
I discovered his prenuptial agreement. In his prenuptial agreement, and this for me was the smoking gun, everyone who's written about Carnegie earlier has said that he gave away his money because he was guilty about Homestead.
Right.
That's the standard line. Well, I found in his prenuptial agreement, 5 years before Homestead, when everybody loved him, when he hadn't broken any strikes yet, his wife signs a piece of paper an hour before they're married. And in that piece of paper, she says, and I see it, it's in front of me.
What did you feel like when you actually saw it? What I mean, come on.
You get this rush of adrenaline, and you're looking at the thing and hoping it's for real.
Right.
And then as you
Where
discover
are you?
it is
Where
for
were you
real.
sitting? Where are you?
At this point, I had found this hidden in the Carnegie Corporation papers that are up at Columbia University, and they had yet to be processed. But I
so you got your hands on them.
so I saw it before anybody
archivist.
else. Yeah. So I see this piece of paper, and I'm reading it, and in it says, "I, Louise Whitfield, his fiancée, understand that I am to marry Andrew Carnegie, an immensely rich man. One, I know he's very, very rich. Two, I understand that he's not leaving me anything, that I'm not going to inherit anything. And three, that's fine with me. I'm not going to contest the will. He's given me, a wedding gift of, X dollars. That's all I need." So I discover in the 1880s, he already knows he's going to give away his money.
During his lifetime.
During his lifetime. Oh, no.
Yeah. This
during
is
his
not
lifetime.
on your death. This is
No,
during his lifetime.
During his lifetime, he's going to give away everything that he's made. Then I find all sorts of other stuff. I know that he's a friend of Mark Twain. I know there are Mark Twain, all the Mark Twain letters have been collected. They're out in Berkeley at the Bancroft Library. I write them. I say, "Can you send me the stuff?" They send me like a packet like this. And in it are dozens and dozens of letters between Mark Twain and Carnegie.
And Carnegie writes to everybody.
He writes to everybody.
Every president from
He writes
who?
to everybody.
From Harrison
Everybody from Grant.
Oh, Grant
Really.
on.
Even Grant.
on. And then prime ministers and
yeah.
kings and
Yeah.
dukes. He's prolific. And also, he's self-educated, and he goes through, 1 year of formal schooling? He's done at 12, and he becomes this really, almost a polymath in terms of the things that he can do. But he's also a bit of a nudge and a pain, and he ticks people off, and he talks too much.
Yeah. He never, ever, ever shuts up. And one of the reasons I think he always wanted to be a writer, and he wrote a couple of travelogues, and he wrote a couple of other books, and he wrote lots of essays,
Right.
and lots of letters to the
And you've got
editor.
some good stuff in here in terms of verbatim.
Yeah, well, he writes an incredible amount, and I've got the early drafts and the later drafts. But the reason why he never became more of a writer was he couldn't sit still.
Well,
he
he
didn't
sounds
want
like
to be
a type A cube, but he
didn't want to be in a room.
relaxes.
Well, he has a wonderful time.
Right,
He
I mean,
lives a
he
good life.
loves it.
He plays golf. He takes up golf when he's in his 70s.
He's on the yacht. I mean, he's
He
deal
goes
on
yachting.
vacations, safaris.
Yeah.
Come on, he's got to work hard. Biggest disappointment in Carnegie. I mean, you as a biographer, you are neither the hagiographer that some biographers are, or the hatchet man that other biographers are. You obviously like Carnegie, but there's this undercurrent of, but it's muted disapproval, disappointment. Talk about that element of it.
I very much wanted to find out that he was not responsible for Homestead.
Right, okay.
I really
As a
wanted
historian?
to believe. Yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to believe that Frick was the bad guy.
Right.
And that Carnegie, as he said in his autobiography, if I were there, it would have been different. Carnegie was lying. It didn't happen that way. And I would have much preferred that Carnegie had been innocent of, the crimes that were committed at Homestead.
At the end of his life, let's say post 1900, or 1914 is the real date. He's got this optimistic view that the future would always be rosier, this evolutionary Spencerian view. World War I shatters the belief in rational thought, the power of private wealth, and he really literally suffers a breakdown. I mean, I think his whole universe collapsed.
He can't believe. He sees it on the horizon. He sees World War I coming.
He's in contact with Taft, and
He's
and
all
over the place.
He becomes his own shuttle. He engages in shuttle diplomacy.
He does.
At a time when there are no planes.
Right. Shuttles are slow.
And he does everything he possibly can to stop World War I from coming.
Right.
When World War I arrives, when the Great War arrives, and then when he understands that the nations of Europe are going to bleed themselves white, they are going to destroy a generation of their young men on the battlefields, he realizes that his belief in progress, that his belief in reason is wrong. And that the barbaric ages that Spencer had told him were over.
Right. Had
We're not
emerged.
over.
Oof.
We're not over.
Gives me chills right
He
now.
lapses into silence.
Yeah.
And he spends the last 4 years of his life incommunicado.
It's unbelievable, particularly given the verbosity and the dynamism. How is, in the last minute or so, how is Carnegie relevant today?
Carnegie is very relevant today. One, because he understands that capitalists don't make their money and have absolutely no right to spend it on themselves or to give it to their children. Two, because he believes that it is time to stop war, to stop bloodshed, for the leaders of the nations of the world to sit down together and to negotiate their differences and to arbitrate those differences when they can't negotiate them one-on-one.
Okay. Let's finish with Carnegie. Let's go. What's next? 30 seconds. Book.
Joseph P. Kennedy.
Another biographer.
Another biographer.
Why?
Yes. Because he's another man that there are too many secrets, too many misunderstandings, that everything we know about him is based on rumor, innuendo, and I want to get to the bottom story.
Last question. Do you have secret archives? Do you have access to papers that nobody else has had?
Yes.
Oh! You're coming back.
I'm ready.
Good. Thank you.
My pleasure.